Jake Harrison stood at the edge of the massive platform, looking up at the giant dome above him. The Galactic Council chamber was bigger than anything he had ever seen on Earth. Hundreds of strange creatures sat in floating seats that hung from the curved walls. Some looked like giant spiders with too many eyes. Others were made of blue crystal that sang when they moved. A few were like living water that bubbled and splashed in clear containers. Jake was scared, but he did not show it. He was here to save his people. He was here to save many people across the galaxy. The aliens around him were about to vote on something terrible. They called it the Purification Protocol, but Jake knew what it really was. It was a way to kill entire worlds of people who did not fit in with what the powerful aliens wanted. Lisa Carter stood next to him, holding a small computer tablet. She had been working for months to gather proof of what the aliens were really planning. Her hands shook a little as she turned the pages on her screen. She had seen the secret reports. She knew what happened to the species that had already been destroyed. Are you ready for this? Lisa whispered to Jake. Jake nodded and straightened his dark blue suit. He represented all of humanity today. Every person on Earth, every human colony in space, every man, woman, and child who called themselves human was counting on him. The weight of that responsibility felt heavy on his shoulders. The creature in charge of the meeting was called Vorth Kalen. It looked like a giant spider with silver metal parts grafted onto its body. Its 8 eyes moved independently, looking at different parts of the room at the same time. When it spoke, its voice came through speakers that made it sound like a robot. The Council will now hear from the Terran Republic, Vorth Kalen announced. The word Terran was what the aliens called humans. Ambassador Harrison may present his objections to Protocol 847 Alpha. Jake could hear the tone in the creature's voice. It was the same tone adults used when they let a child speak at a grown-up meeting. They were humoring him. They had already decided what they would do. Jake walked to the center of the chamber. A blue light appeared around him, and suddenly his voice could be heard by every creature in the massive room. He took a deep breath and began to speak. Members of the Galactic Council, we are here today to discuss something that will change the galaxy forever. The Purification Protocol is not what its supporters claim it to be. It is not about keeping peace or maintaining order. It is about killing entire species of people who have done nothing wrong. A strange sound filled the chamber. It was like laughter, but coming from hundreds of different types of creatures. The crystal beings made a sound like wind chimes in a storm. The water creatures bubbled and splashed harder. Even the plant-like aliens rustled their leaves in what Jake knew was amusement. From the highest platform in the chamber, a massive reptilian creature stood up. This was High Commander Zekthera, leader of the Zephyrian Empire. His scales were dark green and black, and his eyes were yellow like a snake's. When he spoke, his forked tongue flicked out between his words. The young species speaks of things it does not understand, Zekthera said, his voice a low hiss. They have been part of this council for only 50 years. We have maintained order in this galaxy for thousands of years. Some species simply cannot exist alongside civilized beings. Jake felt anger rising in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. High Commander, you speak of civilization, but what civilization destroys entire worlds of innocent people? What civilization calls murder a solution to problems? More laughter echoed through the chamber. A creature that looked like a floating jellyfish with lights inside it spoke through its translator. The humans are so young, so innocent. They think the galaxy runs on good intentions and happy thoughts. Jake pressed on. I have evidence of what really happens under these protocols. The Karathi were declared incompatible with galactic civilization. The official report said they were too aggressive. But the real reason was that they controlled the largest deposits of quantum crystals in the outer rim. After they were eliminated, guess who took control of those crystals? He pointed at Zekthera. The Zephyrians did. Just like they took the Luminous One's energy research after declaring them a threat to galactic stability. Just like they took the Singing Crystal's homeworld after claiming the creatures were spreading dangerous frequencies. The Zephyrian commander's eyes narrowed. The human speaks of matters beyond his comprehension. The Kurathy were violent. The luminous ones were unstable. The singing crystals were indeed dangerous. We acted to protect the galaxy. Dr. Amy Foster stepped forward. She was a scientist who had spent years studying the different species in the galaxy. She had seen the real reports, the ones that were supposed to be secret. High Commander, I have studied the biological and psychological profiles of all these species. None of them showed any signs of the aggression or instability you claim. In fact, they were all remarkably peaceful. Amy activated a holographic display that showed pictures and videos of the destroyed species. The Kurathy looked like tall, thin humanoids with large eyes and gentle faces. The luminous ones were beings of pure energy who had created beautiful art with light. The singing crystals were exactly what their name suggested, crystalline life forms that made music with their bodies. These are not the faces of dangerous creatures, Amy said. These are the faces of people who were murdered for their resources and their uniqueness. The chamber erupted in what could only be described as alien laughter. The sound was terrible to human ears. Some creatures clicked and chittered. Others made sounds like breaking glass or rushing water. A few species that communicated through smell released clouds of chemicals that their translators turned into mocking words. Vorthkalen's metal-enhanced voice cut through the noise. The Terran delegation presents interesting theories, but theories are not facts. The Council has reviewed these cases thoroughly. The decisions were made for the good of galactic civilization. Jake felt something break inside him. These creatures were not going to listen to reason. They were not going to look at evidence. They had already made up their minds, and nothing he could say would change them, but he had to try. Somewhere in the galaxy there were species that would be the next targets. Somewhere there were children who would grow up to be killed by this protocol if he could not stop it. You call this civilization, Jake said, his voice growing stronger. But what kind of civilization votes to murder the innocent? What kind of civilization allows genocide and calls it policy? The laughter grew louder. A creature that looked like a tree with too many branches spoke through its translator. The humans are so dramatic. They make everything sound like the end of the world. For the species you plan to kill, it will be the end of their world. Jake shot back. Lisa stepped up next to him. She had been quiet until now, but she could not stay silent anymore. We have recordings of Zephyrian military transmissions. We have documents showing how they identify species with valuable resources or unique abilities. We have proof that this protocol is not about protecting anyone. It is about eliminating competition. The Chamber's response was immediate and overwhelming. The mockery was so loud that the translation systems began to overload. Creatures were making sounds that ranged from amused to openly hostile. Some were pointing at the humans with whatever appendages they had. Others were moving in ways that clearly indicated they thought the whole thing was a joke. Jake looked around the chamber and realized the terrible truth. These creatures were not just dismissing his evidence. They were enjoying his pain. They were entertained by his desperation. To them, this was not a serious discussion about life and death. It was a show, and he was the entertainment. The young ambassador from Earth stood in the center of the greatest gathering of intelligent species in the galaxy, and he had never felt more alone. Jake took a deep breath and activated the large holographic display in the center of the chamber. The air filled with three-dimensional images that showed star systems, military ships, and detailed reports. These were not theories or guesses. These were real documents that his people had risked their lives to obtain. I want to show you something, Jake said, his voice carrying across the vast chamber. These are actual Zephyrian military orders. These are communication records between their fleet commanders. These are the real reasons why entire species have been eliminated. The first image showed a beautiful planet covered in purple forests. Strange flying creatures moved through the sky like living rainbows. This was the homeworld of the gentle singers, Jake explained. They were declared dangerous because their songs could supposedly drive other species insane. But look at this. He changed the image to show a Zephyrian military report. The text appeared in the air, translated into hundreds of alien languages. The real reason is right here. The gentle singers had discovered a way to use sound waves to create unlimited clean energy. The Zephyrians wanted that technology. More laughter filled the chamber, but Jake ignored it. He showed image after image, document after document. Each one told the same story. A species would develop something valuable or unique. The Zephyrians would find a reason to call them dangerous. The council would vote to eliminate them. The Zephyrians would take their technology and their worlds. Amy Foster moved to stand beside Jake. She had brought her own evidence, scientific data that she had gathered over years of careful research. I have studied the biology of 47 species that were eliminated under previous protocols, she said. Not one of them showed any signs of being actually dangerous to galactic civilization. She activated her own display, showing complex charts and graphs. The Karathi had brain structures that made them incapable of violence. The luminous ones existed in a state of pure energy that made them physically unable to harm other beings. The singing crystals were literally just rocks that made music. How could any of these species threaten anyone? A creature that looked like a giant sea anemone spoke through its translator. The human scientists play with numbers and charts. They do not understand the complexities of maintaining galactic order. What complexity? Amy shot back. The complexity of finding excuses to commit murder? The chamber erupted in sounds that were clearly meant to be insulting. The crystal beings made sharp, discordant notes. The water creatures bubbled and splashed violently. Even some of the normally quiet species began making noise. Jake continued his presentation, showing more evidence. He displayed records of Zephyrian ships arriving at peaceful worlds. He showed images of civilians being killed, of cities being destroyed, of entire cultures being wiped out. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The pattern is clear, Jake said, his voice getting stronger as he spoke. The Zephyrians do not eliminate species that are dangerous. They eliminate species that are inconvenient. They eliminate species that have something they want or that might compete with them in the future. High Commander Zek Thera rose from his platform, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber. The human child speaks of things he cannot comprehend. The Zephyrian Empire has sacrificed much to maintain peace in this galaxy. We have taken on the burden of making hard decisions so that weaker species can live in safety. Safety? Jake laughed bitterly. You call genocide safety? You call murder a sacrifice? The only thing the Zephyrians have sacrificed is their conscience. The reptilian commander's eyes flashed with anger. You dare insult the protectors of galactic civilization? Your species has existed in space for barely 50 years. We have been maintaining order for millennia. Order built on mass murder is not order, Jake replied. It is tyranny. Lisa Carter stepped forward, holding her tablet. She had been working quietly during Jake's presentation, gathering real-time intelligence from human agents across the galaxy. Commander Zek Thera, would you like to explain why your fleets are currently surrounding 3 star systems that have not been declared dangerous yet? The chamber fell silent for a moment. This was new information, something that had not been part of the official proceedings. Lisa activated her own display, showing current military positions throughout the galaxy. The peaceful gardeners of Verdania, the artistic collective of Tau Ceti, and the gentle shepherds of the Outer Rim, Lisa read from her tablet. All 3 species are currently surrounded by Zephyrian military forces. None of them have been declared dangerous or incompatible. None of them have been brought before this council. Yet your ships are in position to begin elimination protocols. The mockery in the chamber began to fade. Some of the alien delegates started looking at each other uncertainly. Even species that had been laughing at the humans began to shift uncomfortably. In their seats, Jake seized the moment. This is what the purification protocol really is. It is not about responding to threats. It is about giving the Zephyrians legal permission to eliminate anyone they choose. Today, it might be species that are supposedly dangerous. Tomorrow, it will be species that are simply inconvenient. Amy activated another display, showing the locations of valuable resources throughout the galaxy. Look at this pattern. Every species that has been eliminated controlled valuable resources or strategic locations. The Karathi controlled quantum crystal deposits. The luminous ones had energy research facilities. The singing crystals lived on worlds with rare minerals. And now, Lisa added, the peaceful gardeners control the most fertile agricultural worlds in the galaxy. The artistic collective has developed new communication technologies. The gentle shepherds have created advanced terraforming techniques. The chamber was becoming quieter. The constant mockery and laughter were being replaced by uncertain murmurs. Some of the smaller species were beginning to look nervous. They were starting to understand that they might be next. Jake pressed his advantage. The Zephyrians have turned this council into a tool for their expansion. They identify species with valuable assets, manufacture reasons to call them dangerous, and then use council authority to eliminate them legally. And you are all helping them do it. Vorth Kalen's mechanical voice cut through the growing unease. The Deron delegation makes serious accusations without proper evidence. Military positioning is a normal part of galactic defense. The Zephyrians have legitimate reasons for their fleet movements. Legitimate reasons? Jake asked. Like the legitimate reasons they had for eliminating 47 other species? A new voice spoke from the chamber. It was a creature that looked like a giant butterfly with wings made of living light. The translator identified it as a representative of the ethereal collective, one of the more neutral species. If the human accusations are true, the ethereal said, then we have all been complicit in genocide. But accusations are not proof. The Zephyrians have provided justification for their actions. Jake nodded. Yes, they have. And every single one of those justifications was false. Would you like to see the real communications between Zephyrian commanders during the elimination of the Karathi? He activated a new display, showing intercepted military transmissions. The messages were cold and clinical, discussing the elimination of civilian populations and the seizure of resources. There was no talk of danger or threat. There was only talk of efficiency and profit. The chamber was now almost completely quiet. The weight of the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Even some of the creatures that had been laughing at the humans were now looking thoughtful or concerned, but High Commander Zekthera was not finished. The humans present stolen military communications as evidence. They are spies and criminals. Their so-called proof is the result of illegal intelligence gathering. Illegal? Amy asked. Is it illegal to document genocide? Is it illegal to gather evidence of mass murder? It is illegal to steal military secrets, Zekthera hissed. The humans have violated galactic law to obtain these documents. Jake felt his anger rising again. We violated your laws to expose your crimes. We risked our lives to save innocent people. And you call us criminals. And the mockery was starting to return to the chamber. The brief moment of uncertainty was passing. The alien delegates were remembering that the Zephyrians were powerful and the humans were weak. They were remembering that it was safer to laugh at the accusers than to anger the accused. But Jake was not finished. He had one more piece of evidence, one more truth to reveal, and this one would show the council exactly what they were really voting for. Jake activated his final display, and the chamber filled with the most damning evidence yet. The holographic projection showed a detailed map of the galaxy, with red markers indicating every species that had been eliminated. Blue markers showed species that were currently targeted. Yellow markers showed species that were likely to be next. This is the Zephyrian plan for the next century, Jake said, his voice echoing in the now quiet chamber. They do not plan to stop with the current targets. They plan to eliminate every species that might challenge their dominance. The map was horrifying. Nearly half of the galaxy's species were marked for elimination. Some were scheduled for destruction within the next 5 years. Others would be eliminated over the following decades. The pattern was clear and systematic. Amy Foster pointed to specific markers on the map. The ethereal collective is marked for elimination in 15 years. The Peaceful builders are scheduled for destruction in 8 years. Even the neutral traders, who have never shown aggression to anyone, are on the list. A shocked silence fell over the chamber. Many of the species that had been laughing at the humans were now seeing their own names on the elimination list. The ethereal representative who had spoken earlier was staring at the red marker over their homeworld. "This cannot be accurate," the ethereal said, their voice trembling through the translator. "We have maintained neutrality for thousands of years. We have never threatened anyone." Jake nodded grimly. "According to the Zephyrian planning documents, you are marked for elimination because your energy manipulation abilities could be weaponized. They consider you a long-term threat." High Commander Zekthera stood up abruptly, his massive form radiating anger. "These documents are fabricated. The humans are creating false evidence to support their lies. Are they?" Lisa Carter asked, stepping forward with her tablet. "Then explain this." She activated a new display showing a live feed from Zephyrian military networks. The information was streaming in real time, showing troop movements, supply requisitions, and tactical planning. "Our intelligence teams have been monitoring your communications for months. Everything we have shown you is being confirmed by your own military right now." The chamber erupted into chaos. Species that had been marked for elimination began speaking all at once. The ethereal collective was demanding explanations. The peaceful builders were calling for emergency sessions. Even some of the neutral species were expressing concern, but the most powerful voices in the chamber were not concerned. The crystal beings continued their discordant chiming. The water creatures bubbled with what sounded like amusement. The spider-like creatures that controlled the Council's administration were clicking their approval. Vo Arth-Kalen raised his mechanical voice above the chaos. "The chamber will come to order. The Terran delegation has presented their evidence. The Council will now vote on Protocol 847 Alpha." Jake felt his heart sink. Despite everything he had shown them, despite the overwhelming evidence, despite the proof that many of them were marked for death, the Council was still going to vote. They were still going to legitimize genocide. "Wait," Jake said, his voice cutting through the noise. "You cannot vote on this without proper discussion. The evidence we have presented changes everything. The Council needs time to investigate these claims." The spider-like speaker's multiple eyes focused on Jake with cold amusement. "The evidence has been noted. The Council finds it interesting but not sufficient to delay the vote. The Zephyrian Empire has provided adequate justification for the protocol." "Adequate justification?" Amy Foster stepped forward, her scientific mind struggling to process the illogical decision. "We have shown you systematic genocide. We have shown you fabricated evidence. We have shown you that half the species in this chamber are marked for elimination. How is that not sufficient?" The laughter returned, louder and more cruel than before. The crystal beings made sounds like breaking glass. The water creatures splashed violently in their containers. Even some of the plant-like species rustled their leaves in what was clearly mockery. A creature that looked like a living cloud of gas spoke through its translator. "The young species thinks the galaxy should stop because they have discovered unpleasant truths. The galaxy does not stop for anyone." High Commander Zekthera's voice cut through the mockery. "The humans have presented stolen documents and wild theories. They have no proof that these documents are genuine. They have no authority to make demands of this Council." Jake felt something breaking inside him. These creatures were not just ignoring the evidence. They were enjoying the suffering it represented. They were entertained by the idea that entire species would be eliminated. To them, genocide was not a crime, it was policy. "You are voting to murder billions of innocent people," Jake said, his voice filled with desperation. "You are voting to destroy entire civilizations. How can you do this?" The mockery reached a new level. Creatures throughout the chamber were making sounds that could only be described as cruel laughter. Some were pointing at the humans with whatever appendages they had. Others were moving in ways that clearly indicated they thought. The whole thing was hilarious. Vorthkalen's mechanical voice rose above the chaos. The vote will now commence. All species in favor of Protocol 847 Alpha will register their approval. The voting display activated, showing the names of all 300 species in the Council. One by one, green lights appeared next to their names. The Zephyrian Empire voted first, followed by their closest allies. The crystal beings voted yes. The water creatures voted yes. The spider-like administrators voted yes. Jake watched in horror as the green lights multiplied. 200 species voted yes. 250. 280. The map of approvals was overwhelmingly green. All species opposed to Protocol 847 Alpha will now register their disapproval. Vorthkalen announced. Jake held his breath. Surely now, after everything they had seen, some species would vote against genocide. Surely some of them would choose to do what was right. The human delegation voted no. The peaceful gardeners of Verdania voted no. The gentle shepherds of the Outer Rim voted no. A few other small species that Jake had never heard of voted no when the voting was complete. Only 12 species had voted against the protocol. 12 out of 300. The rest had either voted yes or abstained, which was the same as voting yes. The chamber erupted in celebration. The creatures that had voted for genocide were making sounds of joy and triumph. The Zephyrians were hissing their approval. The crystal beings were chiming in harmony. Even some of the neutral species seemed pleased that the unpleasant business was finally over. Protocol 847 Alpha is hereby approved, Vorthkalen announced. The purification protocols will commence within one standard galactic cycle. Jake stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by 300 alien species that had just voted to legitimize mass murder. The weight of failure pressed down on him like a physical force. He had failed his own species. He had failed every species that would now be eliminated under the protocol, but worse than failure was the realization of what these creatures really were. They were not a civilization. They were not a council of intelligent beings working together for the common good. They were a collection of cowards and collaborators who had just voted to let the strong eliminate the weak. Lisa Carter was crying. Amy Foster was staring at the vote count in disbelief. Both of them had believed that reason and evidence would prevail. Both of them had believed that intelligent beings would choose to do what was right when shown the truth. But Jake was beginning to understand something that changed everything. These creatures had seen the truth. They had seen the evidence. They had seen the proof of genocide. And they had chosen to support it anyway. General Pete Collins, who had been silent throughout the entire proceedings, stepped up beside Jake. The old soldier had been watching everything with the cold eyes of a military strategist. He had been evaluating not just the evidence, but the character of the beings who were judging it. "Ambassador," Collins said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of military authority, "I believe it is time." Jake looked at him with questioning eyes. Collins nodded toward the exit of the chamber. "Protocol 7, sir. It is time to implement Protocol 7. Jake felt something shift inside him. Protocol 7 was humanity's most secret contingency plan. It was the option they had hoped never to use. It was the last resort when all other options had failed. But as he looked around the chamber at creatures celebrating genocide, Jake realized that all other options had indeed failed. The time for speeches was over. The time for evidence was over. The time for hoping that reason would prevail was over. It was time for humanity to show the galaxy what consequences looked like. Jake Harrison closed his briefcase with a quiet click. The sound seemed to echo in the massive chamber despite all the noise from the celebrating aliens. Lisa Carter powered down her tablet and gathered her papers. Amy Foster disconnected her displays and packed away her research materials. The three humans moved with calm, deliberate motions. There was no anger in their movements. There was no shouting or dramatic gestures. They simply began to pack their things as if they were leaving. Any normal meeting, the chamber gradually began to quiet as alien delegates noticed what the humans were doing. The celebration continued, but some creatures started watching the human delegation with curiosity. Why were they packing? The meeting was not over yet. There were still procedures to follow, documents to sign, implementation schedules to discuss. General Collins stepped forward and spoke quietly to Jake. His words could not be heard by the alien delegates, but Jake nodded in understanding. The general then touched a small device on his uniform. It was a communication device that sent a coded signal to every human ship, station, and facility in the galaxy. The signal was simple. 3 short pulses, followed by 7 long ones, followed by 3 short pulses again. To anyone else, it would seem like a routine communication test. But to humans, it meant only one thing. Protocol 7 was now active. Jake stood up straight and looked around the chamber one final time. His eyes met those of Speaker Vorth Kalen, whose multiple spider-like eyes were watching him with what seemed like amusement. He looked at High Commander Zek Thera, whose reptilian features showed satisfaction and triumph. He looked at the hundreds of other creatures who had just voted to legalize genocide. The Terran Republic formally withdraws from the Galactic Council, Jake said, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent chamber. Effective immediately, all human territories, stations, vessels, and personnel are no longer bound by Council authority or Council law. A shocked silence fell over the chamber. This was not something that had ever happened before. Species joined the Council, but they did not leave it. The Council was supposed to be the ultimate authority in the galaxy. No one simply walked away from it. Vo Arth Kalen's mechanical voice broke the silence. The Terran Republic cannot simply withdraw from the Council. There are procedures. There are obligations. There are contracts and agreements that must be honored. Jake looked at the spider-like creature with calm eyes. The Terran Republic entered the Council in good faith, believing it to be an organization dedicated to peace and justice. We have discovered that it is actually an instrument of genocide. We will not be part of an organization that legitimizes SS murder. You cannot just leave! High Commander Zek Thera roared, his massive form rising from his platform. The Council has authority over all civilized species. The Council has authority over those who choose to recognize it, Jake replied. Calmly, we no longer choose to recognize an organization that votes for genocide, but Jake was not finished. He had one more announcement that would change everything. Furthermore, the Terran Republic hereby invokes the Sanctuary Protocols. Any species facing elimination under the Purification Protocol is welcome to relocate to human-protected space. We will provide transport, resources, protection, and new homes to any who seek them. The implications of this statement hit the chamber like a shockwave. The humans were not just leaving. They were offering to protect the species that the Council had marked for death. They were directly challenging the Council's authority and the Zephyrian Empire's plans. A creature that looked like a giant flower with too many petals spoke through its translator. The humans cannot do this. They do not have the military power to protect anyone. They are a young species with limited resources. Jake smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. We shall see. As the human delegation walked toward the chamber's exit, something unexpected happened. The representative of the peaceful gardeners of Verdania stood up from their seat. The plant-like creature began walking toward the exit as well. Then the gentle shepherds rose and began to follow. Their woolly forms moved slowly but with determination. They had heard Jake's offer of sanctuary, and they were accepting it. More species began to stand. The artistic collective of Tau Ceti, whose members looked like living sculptures made of colored light, rose from their seats. The quiet builders, who resembled giant bees with silver wings, began to follow the growing procession, one by one. Dozens of species that had been marked for elimination under the Purification Protocol began to leave their seats and walk toward the exit. They were following the humans out of the chamber. The chamber erupted into chaos. The remaining delegates began shouting in hundreds of different languages. The translators were overloaded trying to convert all the different sounds into understandable speech. Stop. Vorth Kalen commanded, his mechanical voice rising above the chaos. You cannot leave. The Council forbids it. But the exodus continued. Even some species that had not been marked for immediate elimination began to stand and leave. They had seen what the council really was, and they wanted no part of it. The ethereal collective, whose representative had been shocked to see their homeworld marked for future elimination, rose from their platforms. Their butterfly-like forms glowed brighter as they prepared to leave. Species that looked like walking trees covered in silver bark began to move toward the exit. They were followed by creatures that resembled living crystals, but not the same crystal beings that had voted for the protocol. These were smaller, gentler beings who had always been peaceful. High Commander Zekdara was screaming now, his voice a harsh hiss that cut through the chaos. "You are making a mistake! You need the Council. You need our protection. Without us, you will be destroyed by the chaos of space." Jake paused at the exit and turned back to face the chamber. Nearly a third of the species were now walking out with him. The remaining delegates were in panic, some trying to stop the exodus, others arguing among themselves. "High Commander," Jake said, his voice calm despite the chaos around him, "you are the chaos we need protection from." As the human delegation and their followers reached the exit, Jake sent one final message to the Council. "The Terran Republic will establish diplomatic relations with any species that wishes peaceful contact. We will trade with any species that treats others with respect. We will defend any species that faces genocide. What we will not do is participate in an organization that legitimizes murder." The doors of the chamber closed behind the departing delegates, leaving the remaining council members in chaos. Outside, Jake could see the ships that had brought the various species to the council meeting. Many of them were already powering up their engines, preparing to leave. Lisa Carter was smiling through her tears. "Jake, do you realize what you just did? You just split the Galactic Council in half." Amy Foster was checking her tablet, monitoring communications from across the galaxy. "It is more than that," she said, her voice filled with amazement. "I am getting reports from human facilities everywhere. Protocol 7 is being implemented. Our people are leaving Council space. Our ships are withdrawing from joint operations. Our trade agreements are being suspended." General Collins nodded grimly. "The economic impact will be immediate. Humans are involved in almost every aspect of galactic commerce. Our agricultural worlds feed half the galaxy. Our transport networks carry goods across thousands of light years. Our technology maintains communication systems and power grids across hundreds of worlds." Jake looked back at the massive council building one last time. Inside, the remaining delegates were probably still arguing about what had just happened. They probably thought this was just a temporary tantrum, that the humans would come back once they realized they needed the council. They were wrong. Protocol 7 was not a negotiating tactic. It was a complete withdrawal from galactic civilization as it currently existed. The humans and their allies were going to build something new, something better, something that did not require genocide to maintain order. As their ship lifted off from the council world, Jake wondered if the remaining delegates understood what they had just lost. They had chosen to support genocide rather than justice. They had chosen fear rather than courage. They had chosen to be ruled by the strong rather than to protect the weak. Now they would learn the consequences of those choices. Captain Rick Martinez received the coded signal while his ship, the Defender, was patrolling the edge of human space near the Centauri system. 3 short pulses, 7 long ones, 3 short again. Protocol 7 was active. Rick had trained for this moment but had hoped it would never come. He immediately activated his ship's communication system and sent messages to every human vessel in his sector. Within minutes, the order was spreading across the galaxy like ripples on a pond. Every human ship, every human station, every human colony received the same message. It was time to come home. The withdrawal began immediately. Captain Sarah Brooks, commanding a cargo vessel in the Andromeda trade route, suddenly discovered urgent family business that required her immediate return to Earth space. Dr. Tony Williams, who had been working on a joint research project with alien scientists, received an emergency message about a medical crisis that needed his attention. Engineer Nancy Davis, who maintained the power systems on 3 different alien worlds, found that her contracts had suddenly expired. None of them explained why they were leaving. They simply left. Human merchants closed their shops. Human teachers ended their classes. Human technicians shut down their equipment and walked away. Across the galaxy, humans were disappearing from their jobs and responsibilities without explanation or fanfare. The first signs of trouble appeared within days. The Zephyrian homeworld, which relied on human-grown food from agricultural colonies, began experiencing shortages. Their own worlds were too focused on military production to grow enough food for their massive population. They had always depended on human farmers to feed their people. High Commander Zekthera sent angry messages to human authorities, demanding that the food shipments continue. He received no response. The human agricultural colonies had simply stopped communicating with non-human customers. The massive cargo ships that had carried food across the galaxy were nowhere to be found on the crystal world of Shimmer Prime. The beautiful singing towers that the crystal beings used for communication began to fall silent. The harmonic resonators that kept the towers functioning had been designed and maintained by human engineers. Without regular maintenance, the delicate equipment began to fail. The water world of Aquatica Prime faced an even worse crisis. The atmospheric processors that allowed the water creatures to breathe outside. Their ocean environments were shutting down one by one. The human technicians who understood how to repair them were gone. The deeplings found themselves trapped in their underwater cities, unable to travel to other worlds, but the most devastating blow came to the Galactic Communication Network itself. Dr. Susan Parker had been the lead designer of the quantum communication arrays that allowed instant communication across the galaxy. The arrays were incredibly complex, requiring constant adjustment and maintenance by people who understood quantum physics at the deepest level. As the human technicians withdrew, the communication network began to collapse. Messages that had once traveled instantly across thousands of light years now took weeks or months to arrive. The great galactic civilization that had prided itself on unity and cooperation suddenly found itself fragmented and isolated. Within a month, the economic collapse was complete. The galactic credit system, which had been managed by human financial experts, crashed when the computers that ran it were suddenly abandoned. Trade routes that had operated for centuries shut down when human pilots stopped flying them. Manufacturing centers ground to a halt when human designed. Equipment stopped working and no one knew how to fix it. The ethereal collective sent desperate messages to the former council delegates who had left with the humans. Their beautiful crystal cities were dying without the energy systems that humans had helped them build. Their people were facing extinction not from war or genocide, but from technological collapse. The peaceful gardeners, safely relocated to human-protected space, sent back a simple message: "We are safe. Our new homes provide everything we need. Thank you for giving us sanctuary." Similar messages came from dozens of species that had accepted humanity's offer of protection. The gentle shepherds were thriving on worlds that the humans had terraformed specifically for them. The artistic collective had found new inspiration working with human artists and musicians. The quiet builders were constructing amazing new cities in partnership with human architects. Meanwhile, the species that had remained with the council were facing catastrophe. The great galactic civilization was crumbling because it had been built on human knowledge, human technology, and human labor. Without humans, the complex systems that kept thousands of worlds functioning began to fail. Speaker Vorth Kalen sent increasingly desperate communications to human space. The spider-like creature who had dismissed human concerns with mechanical amusement was now begging for technical assistance. The translation networks were failing. The transportation systems were breaking down. Even the council chambers themselves were having problems with their environmental systems. "The council is willing to negotiate," Vorth Kalen's messages said. "We can discuss modifications to the purification protocol. We can establish new procedures for decision-making. We can create safeguards to prevent future misunderstandings." The human response was always the same: silence. High Commander Zekthera tried a different approach. He sent military threats, promising to invade human space and force them to resume their obligations. But his fleets could not travel far without human-built navigation systems. His ships could not communicate with each other without human-designed communication arrays. His weapons could not be properly maintained without human technicians who understood the complex systems. The Zephyrian Empire, which had built its power on conquest and intimidation, discovered that it had become completely dependent on the very species it had planned to eliminate. Their military might meant nothing if their ships could not fly, and their weapons could not fire. 6 months after the exodus from the Council, Ambassador Jake Harrison sat in his new office on Haven Station, a massive space facility that had become the center of the new alliance. Representatives from 47 species worked together in the station's councils, making decisions through discussion and consensus rather than through force and intimidation. Lisa Carter brought him the daily intelligence reports from Council Space. And the news was grim for the old galactic civilization. The Zephyrian Empire was facing food riots. The crystal beings were losing their cities to technological failure. The water creatures were trapped on their homeworlds. Even the spider-like administrators were struggling to maintain basic government functions. They are requesting a formal diplomatic meeting, Lisa reported. They want to discuss terms for rejoining the galactic community. Jake looked out the window of his office at the busy space lanes around Haven Station. Ships from dozens of species moved peacefully through the area, carrying goods and passengers between worlds that had chosen cooperation over domination. It was everything the old council had pretended to be but never actually was. What are our terms? Jake asked. Amy Foster, who had become the new alliance's chief science advisor, entered the office with a thick folder of documents. The terms are simple, she said. Complete repeal of the Purification Protocol, formal recognition of the rights of all sentient species, establishment of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to investigate all previous eliminations, and removal of the Zephyrian Empire from any position of military authority. Jake nodded. And if they refuse? General Collins, who now commanded the defense forces of the new alliance, smiled grimly. Then they can continue trying to run a galactic civilization without knowing how any of it actually works. The irony was not lost on any of them. The species that had been dismissed as young and naive had proven to be the foundation that held galactic civilization together. The creatures that had mocked human idealism were now begging for human expertise. The council that had voted for genocide was now pleading for mercy. Jake picked up his communication device and recorded a message to be sent to Council Space. The new Galactic Alliance is willing to discuss renewed relations with the old Council. Our terms are non-negotiable. Repeal the Purification Protocol. Investigate all previous genocides. Remove military authority from those who have abused it. When you are ready to build a civilization based on cooperation rather than domination, we will be here. He paused and looked at the thriving community outside his window. Until then, we will continue building something better. The galaxy had learned a hard lesson. True strength came not from the power to destroy, but from the knowledge to create. The species that walked away in silence had proven that sometimes the most powerful response to mockery is simply to remove yourself from those who mock justice and build something worthy of your ideals.